He is the rock star of Apple retail. He's a writer, he's a developer, and he owes me $5. Michael Steeber is here with us today. I'm sorry to spring that $5 thing on you, but we were both at the Apple Tower Theater opening. I want to say
Hmm.
close to 3 years ago now. And later that day, I went online and I saw a picture, and from the balcony, you can see my bald head standing down there. So I take Apple Pay Cash. I mean, whatever you want to do, we can talk after. That's fine. Thank you very much, though, seriously, for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me on the show.
Let me start with your history. Does that start with writing and developing and find its way to Apple Retail, or does that start with Apple Retail and then we find our way to the other things that you're into?
It starts with Apple in general. I first started like writing at 9 to 5 Mac when I was in high school. And that was because I had started to develop an interest in Apple products. So I got my first Mac when I was in middle school. And I just had this interest. And it turned into, me making videos and posting them on YouTube, like tutorial videos about how to do this on your Mac, how to do that. And eventually, yeah, I started writing for 9 to 5 Mac. Um, and I was there for a time into college. And then I was a video editor for a little while. And but the entire time I was still interested in Apple. And then eventually they lured me back to 9 to 5 Mac. So I came back in about 2017. And that was when I really got interested in Apple retail. Um, when I came back to 9 to 5 Mac, it was very open-ended. So it was just like whatever you want to write about, whatever you want to do, you can do it. And one of the first things that I happened to do was to go to a new Apple store near me. It was the one in Madison, Wisconsin. That it had just reopened. They had redesigned it, and I thought, well, it's not terribly far away. I'll just go check it out and write an article about it. And like that's basically what really kickstarted my interest in the store specifically.
Okay, so what was that though? Is that the sort of the energy that happens around a new store opening? Is it the change? Because 2017, we're right around the time that it's changing from the old sort of like silver, like bus model to the kind of really sort of high scale Apple retail thing that Angela Ahrendts brought to
Mhm.
it. I mean, is it the transition? Is it still just the products? Is it the energy of a new store? I mean, what was it that flipped that switch for retail for you?
Well, I've always been interested in architecture. Um, so I had been to a few different Apple stores. I hadn't been to many. And they were like you described, like this stainless steel interior, right? Like that classic look. Um, but this visit in 2017 was my first time at a redesigned store, and that really lit up something in me. That it was just it was exciting. It was something new to study, and it really connected with those interests I have in architecture and design. And I realized like how much there was to research there, and I just kind of dove right in. And the more that I learned about it, the more interested that I became.
So, if your interest really gets piqued in 2017, I hope I'm not going to spring a question that you're not prepared for, but it seems that your knowledge of Apple retail is deep enough that we can talk about this. You go from a very successful Ron Johnson run on Apple retail to a very successful Angela Ahrendts run on Apple retail, narrowly avoiding the iceberg that is John Browett, like right in the middle of that. Are you familiar with that time? And can you comment on it? Because I don't know, it looked wacky for me, and I'm only sort of interested in Apple retail. I mean, well, no, I'm there's a lot of other stuff that I'm interested in with Apple as well, but that was always one. That one kind of sticks out like a sore thumb for me.
Yeah, it was an odd moment. And I think that had they not course corrected, that things might have really turned south for Apple stores. And The stores that we know today could be so much different, right? But it was such a brief window that there wasn't that much damage done, I guess. So if you look at that period of the stores, like uh, from the exterior, basically they just appeared to like stagnate, right? There wasn't really any change. There were very few like significant store openings during that time, right? Like they weren't really moving the needle forward, but it was such a brief enough time that like there was never some major like damaging decision that destroyed the whole thing.
True. If for people who don't know though, and I feel bad because we're talking, like everybody would know this. John Browett was the head of, was it Dixon's or
It was
PC World?
Dixon's.
Oh, yeah, he was
It
the head
was
of,
Dixon's, yeah.
and they were a store that, I mean, successful in the UK from what I understand, but they had a window that was full of all of the products they could possibly have. And when Browett came in, stories were he wanted to know why all of the Apple Store windows weren't just like stacked with all of the products that they had. And there were alarm bells inside Apple retail at the time, like, oh, this isn't going to be good. And I remember outside because I've been doing daily Apple news since 2005, and I remember thinking, oh, this bodes ill for hires because this was one of Tim Cook's, maybe not one of his biggest hires, but one of his most public hires after becoming CEO. And certainly one of the biggest hires that could change things that we would all see. And what we all saw was kind of scary for a second, or the possibilities that we saw in that anyway. So when we talk about John Browett and freak out, now you know why, I guess. So talk to me about the difference. Again, going back and looking at it, talk to me about the differences in the stores. I mean, the Ron Johnson era to the Angela Ahrendts era. Um, like you walk into one, do you get a feel of nostalgia? You walk into one, you say, how do they make it with this as the design? Talk to me about that transition that we've seen.
I think that the transition wouldn't have happened without the construction of Apple Park around the same time,
Hmm.
um, because it wasn't just Angela Ahrendts that came in and masterminded this entire plan, right? Like Apple at that time like developed this really deep partnership with Foster and Partners that designed Apple Park. So the design of the stores as it changed when she joined was in the works in some extent already due to the design and construction of Apple Park, right? Because the stores were designed to mirror the campus. So if you see photos of Apple Park, right, like it's very similar architecture to the newest stores. So that like style came out of that partnership. And Angela's role in that was really she was very focused on the education aspect of it. So the Today at Apple sessions, the idea of the store as a town square. That was her big push the entire time that she was there, right? And it was that initiative along with the architecture that really like formed the direction the stores went.
Hmm. It's I suspect you're too young to remember this, but it's like sort of like the old Gap versus the Gap today. I mean, they almost have that kind of feel because the Gap when I was a kid had neon and
Mm,
silver and like all kinds of things that were
right.
very very flashy and very 80s, which is at the same time when you go to, I think it was the pandemic sort of played with my perception of time. So it feels like it was a couple of years ago. It was probably closer to 5 or 6. But I got to go to the Caesars store in Vegas for the first time because I was there for some concert. I can't remember which one. And I was thinking it was going to be, practically like waterfalls and trees and, hardwood and all that stuff. And the problem is it's a 24-hour store in a casino or in a casino mall. So, I mean, it still looks like one of the very first Apple stores. I want to say even down to having the sort of atomic logo over the Genius bar, which is also still labeled or was last time I was there. There's one more near me too that still has that atomic logo, which every time I walk in, I'm like, well, this is not nearly as good, and yet it feels like home because it was the first. It was the first
Oh yeah.
Apple store I went into. Do you remember the first time you went into an Apple store, or is that too far back for you?
The first time I visited a store was 2010.
Okay.
And that was when I was in, I guess I was in high school at that point. Yeah, but it was before I could drive. So it was a thing where I was like begging my parents to go, and like every time we would go on a road trip, like I would beg them like, oh, if we just drive, 30 minutes this way, we'll get to a store. And then finally they agreed on, so that was the first time I visited a store. But yeah,
Nice.
and it was in the back of my mind then from then on that it was something that was interesting. I just hadn't pursued it yet.
So, talk to me about your interest in Apple in general. Then, I mean, I can, and forgive me, I'll share my story really quickly. The very first computer I worked on was an Apple. The first one I really grokked was a Mac. And then, I was out in the real world and couldn't afford any kind of computer. But every time I was anywhere near a place where I had my either or choice, I gravitated over to the Mac. What is your, because I know we said, do we start with retail or do we start with Apple or which? You said that you were always interested in Apple. What is that? What is that born of? Is that an Apple household? Is that a, give me my choice and I'll go that way? What was it for you with Apple?
Well, there were no Macs, in my school. There were no Macs, at home. Like I hadn't really seen a Mac until maybe about middle school. And I had always just, worked on like old PCs that someone was throwing away, and then I would take it and play games on it or whatever. Um, and I always tried to do creative things on the PCs, but I really, really struggled with it. Like I was always like fighting with what was available to me. So when I first used a Mac, it like really unlocked my ability to actually make things with a computer. And that was really exciting. Like that combined with how much different the design of a Mac was, just like as a physical object,
Yeah.
right? It was intriguing, and I've really never looked back. Yeah,
Yeah. I had a friend who, they, I won't go through their whole story, but basically they ended up with a Mac. And the first time I got to play with, I guess it was Mac Paint or whatever the very first art program was on that, it was like, well, why are we messing around with anything else? Because it got out of
yeah,
your way and just let you create, just as soon as you could. Let's come back to today. Let's come back to today with Apple Retail. Probably one of the biggest changes I think the stores have seen in quite a while, maybe since the whole transition began, is what Apple is doing as far as demonstrating Apple Vision Pro. I know when they talked about it, I was picturing my local Apple store thinking, well, there's just no space. There's no way. Then, of course, when I went in for my demo, oh, it turns out there's like a living room right there where there used to be a bunch of other stuff. Talk to me about what you've seen. Like, how many stores have you visited that have had those? Are they kind of doing it the same way every place? And what are you thinking about the way that they're handling that and showing it off?
so there's two primary ways that they're doing the demos. At smaller stores and less special stores, they'll have just one table near the back that's reserved for demo appointments.
Hmm.
And they have like new stools that are more comfortable, so it's a little bit nicer to sit on because it's a half an hour session. And they'll do the session right there, just like they would like a Genius Bar appointment, or a Today at Apple session, or anything like that. And then at the more significant stores, and it sounds like you've visited one, it'll have a demo zone, which is like near the center back of the store. And there's four sofas, and they're in a square basically. And then there are cabinets, next to them, and they can host four sessions there at a time. And that's a little bit more of a comfortable experience. It's a little. it's a little bit more immersive because you have a little more space to yourself, right? Like there's a carpet underneath the sofa. It feels a little more like you're at home. You're a little bit isolated from the rest of the store.
Right.
So that's how they're doing it. And as so that's not in the majority of the stores. So the majority of the stores you'll go in and it'll just be a single table, right? And my question was, how does this scale over time, right? Like, can they leave these areas in the store permanently? Because to put in those sofas, it takes the space of two tables.
Hmm.
And those weren't tables that they just had like,
People
snacks and
weren't
drinks sitting on.
people
Yeah,
weren't playing cards there, right?
right, right. They were being used for something.
Right.
And now they're being used, or now they're gone. And there's another table at the front of the store with actual like display Vision Pro devices on it. So that's a significant chunk of the store that they can't put iPhones on. So it remains to be seen how how long these zones will stay in the store. So far, they haven't removed any of them.
Right.
Um, yeah,
It kind of feels like they can't remove them, though, can they? Because every time, I'm not exactly sure when people are going to see this, but as we're talking, it was just yesterday that news came out that Apple was sending out, surveys to people saying, "Hey, what's your Apple Vision Pro experience like?" And that, prompted two or three articles about, "Oh, see, it's a disaster," because they want to know what people think of it. And it's like, the minute you take any of those out, I think, then they're saying, "Oh, see, nobody cares about Apple Vision Pro; it's going away." Which,
right.
maybe, but I don't know. It's
So
Go ahead.
yeah, there's that like perception part of it, right? But then
Yeah,
there's also just the nature of the device where like in 6 months the entire world is not going to suddenly like intuitively understand how to use a headset, right? Like it's still a new concept.
right.
So it'll never be in the near term, it'll never be something as like approachable as the iPhone, where you can just walk up and immediately know what to do, right? So even when the next Vision Pro comes out, it's hard to imagine that they don't still need that much attention to it.
Yeah. It's kind of funny actually because I now think of my Apple Store as that's the Apple Store. I didn't realize until I'm talking to you right now. No, my Apple Store is apparently Tony, which I had no idea because I know it's not one of the little, still shoved at the back of a mall, but I didn't realize I had a fancy Apple Store. I'll dress up next time I go in, I think. Um, let's talk about some of the other stuff that you've done because, we've mentioned your writing. And please forgive me because I should know your website is.
So I have a newsletter, and it's called Tabletops. So it's michaelsteeber.substack.com is the website. But yeah, it's all about Apple stores.
Okay, we'll make sure that we remind people about that again. But I want to say, well, except for, again, because I do a daily Apple News podcast, I knew your name from stuff that you would talk about with the different stores. One of the first times, though, you really popped in my mind was the 3D model of the
Mm,
Tyson Corner store. 3D Time Machine. I may be getting the name of that
yes,
wrong. Is that what it's
it's
called?
The Apple Store Time Machine. Yep.
Apple Store Time Machine. Okay. It blew my mind. And this was just on my, regular computer screen because I remember the shelves of software. I remember, like it's strange because it's small and it's not photorealistic. And yet I was there. Tell people, please, about what you did and then a little bit about how you did it.
So the Time Machine project was not only Tyson's Corner, but it was several Apple stores. So I did Tyson's Corner, and then I did the Stanford Shopping Center store when it
Okay.
was a mini store. That was back in 2004. It was an initiative to make the mini stores. So that the original Fifth Avenue glass cube. Um, the original design, not what it looks like now. And then the Infinite Loop campus store, which
Hmm.
is now closed. So that's a little bit more special now that that you can't even go to the real thing.
Yeah.
Um, and my idea was to represent every major era of Apple retail. So I picked a store from each era that I felt was significant in some way, or showed where Apple was, in their journey at that point, that represented it well. So what I did is I modeled all four of these stores in 3D, and I didn't know 3D modeling before this, so I had to first learn all that. Like my background was graphic design, so but not 3D. Um, and there was a lot of research involved, as you can imagine. Like I basically had to scour the internet for like every shred of video and every single photo I could find from these stores, and we're going back 20 years, so it was difficult. Working with a lot of like 640 by 480 tiny little photos from 2001. Um, and then I put these together, and then I built it into a Mac app, and it's built with Unity, the 3D engine. So
Hmm.
yeah, and then I packaged that up, and I was really surprised by how many people enjoyed it. I kind of made it as just like a project because like I was super interested in this, and like I've never been to I had never been to those stores like when they were built. Like I don't remember that era, so I kind of wanted to see it for myself. And but just a lot of people really seemed to connect with it, like shared their memories with me about their first time visiting an Apple store. So it was really cool.
Yeah, there was something just visceral about it, and I'm not sure. I mean, again, it's not like putting on an Apple Vision Pro and walking around in it or anything like that. It's not like a dream, but I mean, you nailed it. It was
Yeah.
like being there, which I do remember doing. So yeah. Now the other thing that you've got, and this honestly strikes me as it can be difficult to find information about an Apple store on an Apple
Mm.
website. And I don't know why that is the case, because you would think that that would be a thing that they would want to make a little bit easier. But I digress. You have an app, it's called Facades, that I feel like, I mean, it serves as a service. I mean, it exists as a service, I think, both to people who are interested in the history, people who are interested in the architecture, but also just in people who want, like, good information about the Apple store that they're going to be trying to visit. Let people know what Facades is.
So Facades is a directory of sorts. I call it a field guide to Apple stores. And I think that really sums it up well. It has every store in it, not just the stores that are currently open, but even the old stores and stores that have closed. Um, and there's information about, not only like when it opened, but the design style, right? Like what the opening day gift was, like what the T-shirt looked like. There's there's statistics. You can track which stores you've been to, and so it's kind of grown into a larger project over time. Um, it really started when when I was writing at 9 to 5 Mac, and I had built up, this information, and when I would go to write a story, I would have to, search through, like I had a whole bunch of notes in Apple Notes, and like a whole bunch of like a big folder tree in Finder, and I was like looking for information. I could never find it. And so it was kind of a resource to help me. And I actually didn't start writing it until I left 9 to 5 Mac. So I really wish I would have had it then. But yeah, that's kind of what was the origin of it. And it's been something that I've continued to develop, and kind of like the Apple Store time machine. Like I was surprised that there was like someone else other than me that was interested enough in it. And there's a community around the app now that like tracks their visits, and is like checking in at new locations. So it's pretty cool.
It is and obviously we're not here to sell it because I think it's free. But I mean, it
Yeah.
is it's. I want to say I was visiting the Nashville store about a year ago, and being able to look at it before I went in a way that the Apple website just doesn't allow you to do. Got a couple of questions. I don't know which way to go. Have you like or has Apple Retail ever talked to you? Have they reached out? I mean, are you guys cool, or are you sort of off on the side going, man, I hope nobody ever, says or sees or anything like that?
I've never had any problem like with Apple with the app,
Hmm.
which was something that I worried about when I first submitted it to the App Store, right? I thought, is Apple going to approve this? Like I was extremely careful to about what I included in the app, right? Like there's actually not a single Apple logo in the app. Like
Hmm.
all of the images in it are from the web. So there's not bundled any actual Apple intellectual property in the app at all. So I was really careful with that. I am careful to not even use the term Apple Store in the app. It's not in the app description.
Okay.
Like the app description on the App Store says like something like your favorite retail stores. Like it's all it's all very carefully done. And so I've
Right.
never had a problem with app review. Um, Obviously, I don't think the app would ever be like featured on the App Store. Um, but
Right.
but yeah, so it's I don't know that I've heard from people that enjoy it at Apple, but aside from that, I don't think that anyone has a problem with it for sure.
Yeah, I've never in the years that I've been doing this, I've never officially heard from anyone at Apple, but I've always like when I have, it's always been somebody who works there likes something. So I'm curious though. Well, now I'm jumping back and forth, like I said I was going to do a minute ago. Talk to me about Apple retail since Angela Ahrendts left, and I guess it's Deirdre O'Brien who's kind of
Mhm.
point person on Apple retail at this point. I mean, is this not to detract from her? Is she now in a place of sort of like tending to this thing that was built? I mean, are there talk to me about the new watch. New, it's been probably 5 years now, but talk to me about the new watch that's overseeing.
I think it was like for someone like me that watches what Apple's doing, it was a difficult time for Deirdre O'Brien to come in because she started in May of 2019, and then obviously the next year with COVID,
Yeah.
it really upset everything with Apple stores. So it's been challenging for me to determine what changed because of the change in leadership and what changed because of COVID. And I've found it really tough to try to pick apart which changes would have happened anyway and which changes are a response to like changes in the way people shop, right? Like there's a lot more online shopping, a lot more just in-store pickup, right?
Hmm.
So I think what we've seen is that Apple has become a lot more, I guess, pragmatic in the way that they operate their stores. They've become even more careful about the locations that they choose to build a store in. Um, I think that every time they have to close a store, which isn't very often, but it does happen, obviously that doesn't look great and they would rather avoid it. But they are essentially forced to leave certain locations because the mall dies.
Hmm.
And, then the sales are going to dry up and no fault of Apple's really. But, um, so I think they're like much more careful than they were, 10, 15 years ago about choosing locations that they really know are going to be like long-term locations, right? Where they can imagine, not just 5 years from now, but 10, 20, 30 years from now, they can still have a store there. Um, yeah.
Speaking of choosing your locations, do you hit every Apple store opening, or do you? pick and choose? Because I wasn't surprised
No,
to find that you were at the Tower Theater open at the same time. I was surprised to, I wish I had said, "Hey, Michael Steeber, are you going to be there?" Or something like that. So I could have said, "Hey," when you were there. Do you go to every one, or do you
no,
go to what's
I wish I
convenient?
could.
Yeah,
Um, I pick and choose, and I certainly did travel more before 2020.
yeah,
I still haven't traveled as much as I did before that. So yeah, I've been to I think 82 different Apple stores, which there are people I know that have been to quite a few more than that.
yeah,
Actually, yeah, but um, yeah, I would go to every opening if I could, though.
yeah. I was amazed, and I feel bad that I'm forgetting his name. But the guy who used to do IFO Apple Store, I mean, that was the
Gary
whole thing.
Allen.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
And it was Gary. I couldn't remember his last name, but that's how it started. Was just like he was going to be at the Apple Store anyway, and then yeah, that was kind of a crazy thing. All right, so you've been to about 82 stores. If you just want to limit yourself to those 82, what's your favorite?
wow. Um, this is it might be too easy of an answer, but I really like Apple Park Visitor Center.
Okay.
Um, and it's because it's where Apple has the most control over the experience.
Mm,
So even on Fifth Avenue, they still have to deal with, the regulations of the city basically. And not that they don't in Cupertino, but at Apple Park Visitor Center, like the entire property is theirs, right? Like to the road. So once you step off the road, everything within that is managed by Apple and has the same attention to detail that the actual interior of the store does, right?
hmm
So everything down like to the curb in the parking lot has like it's rounded in the same way that you would find inside the store, right? Like the lamps in the parking lot are designed by Apple, and then there's a cafe inside the store as well. So it's a place that you can really hang out. Um,
I'm
yeah,
sorry. There's a cafe inside that store.
yeah,
I, w-
that's
I,
the only one in the world.
I was only there one time, but somehow I missed that. I mean, in fairness, I was really exhausted. But I can't believe I missed that. I did buy a hat though, so I don't know which one is my favorite. You didn't ask, but I'm trying to decide. I really like the Tower, the Tower Theater
Hmm.
store. I'm trying to decide though whether I only like that as much as I do because it's the most recent unusual store that I've been to. I was a huge fan of the one on the east side in New York, just
Oh,
because I
yeah,
remember there was a lot of controversy about that one because a lot of the people who pay east side dollars weren't really interested in having lines outside for people 500 deep waiting
right.
for the next iPhone. Once I finally got to see it though, the bones of that building and the way they incorporated the
Yeah.
architecture that was already there. It's a really really pretty place, and we tried to keep the noise down because we didn't want to upset the neighbors.
Well, if you like that store, then you would probably really like the Carnegie Library store in DC.
Oh, I haven't been. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
because
last.
that's like the same idea, right? Like that historic restoration, but it's 3, 4 times larger. So it's really nice.
Well, I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find your stuff again. There is Facades, which you actually told me offline is available for Apple Vision Pro as well.
Yes, it's on all Apple platforms, well, I guess except for watchOS. So yeah, but yeah, Apple Vision Pro, it's all ready to go. So
All right, and
yeah,
then remind people again, if you could, where they can find your newsletter.
sure. So it's called Tabletops, and it's at michaelsteber.substack.com.
I've been reading your stuff for years. I really appreciate the work you do, and I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us today. Michael Steeber, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on the show.